All right, welcome to Dad's Guide to Thrive. You are with Israel, and it's another great chat where we talk to a real dad about real life and real problems and real solutions and all of the stuff that happens that's never quite written in the books or on the brochures about becoming a dad. So, and on top of all of that, what do we need to thrive? How can we be our best for our family, for our kids, and for ourselves, and for our partner and our work colleagues and all that kind of stuff. So, before I ramble any further, I'm going to introduce today's guest, who is Jason McCleery. So Jason has been a cubicle warrior working in an office gig for the past 15 plus years, and has now actually recently started doing work similar to me in that he's coaching dads. Jason runs an amazing podcast called the Epic Dad Podcast, which is how I met him in the first place. He has 3 children aged from 10 to 14, lives in the States, happily married, and has all sorts of cool stories to share with us about the adventure he's been on personally with his own journey of being a better dad over the last little while. So thanks so much for joining me, Jason. Welcome to the party.
Yeah, thanks, Israel. I'm really excited to have this conversation. It was great having you on my podcast a few weeks ago, and so really looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So give us the short version. What is it you're doing for a job, and then what's kind of been, I guess, some of the challenges that you've found within that and being a dad that you've had to sort of overcome? Give us the short version. It's like a 25-hour conversation in that one question.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the short version is I've been, like you mentioned, a cubicle warrior for 15 plus years in normal corporate America. I work for a IT sales company, and so I do a lot of just talking with customers about, IT stuff. But what the struggles that I had within that was, basically I would wake up super early before the kids got up, drive to work. There was like a, roughly hour commute before all the COVID stuff, obviously. But yeah, it was roughly an hour commute, and it was really only like a 20-mile drive. So it was very much bumper to bumper the entire way.
Wow. Yeah, it's not that far to get in 1 hour, is it? That's a long hike.
Exactly. And, it became really draining. So, drive hour to work, sit in a cubicle for 8 hours a day. And, it paid the bills. I get paid pretty well, but it's kind of soul sucking in a way. Just because you're not doing a lot of anything that's really relevant to, building yourself up or building even other people up, which is something that I'm really passionate about. And then, kind of going home, kind of going home another hour plus in traffic and just being really drained by the time I got home. And by the time I got home, it's dinner time. I, cook dinner, and then it's time to get the kids ready for bed and then go to sleep yourself. And then, Groundhog's Day, it's doing it all over again. And it got really, really draining. And it came to the point where there were days when I was driving to work and I'd get about halfway there and I'm like, I just can't do this. And turn the car around and go home and,
Wow.
call in sick for the day. Much like you, I've struggled with depression from time to time and some anxiety along with those kind of soul sucking job and everything. And so I kind of hit to this point where I really needed to figure out what it was that I needed to do to get myself out of this funk. And, really got into personal development and, Tony Robbins and all that kind of good stuff. And really trying to figure out how I wanted to how I wanted to show up to my family as a dad, as a husband, and then just as a man in general to, the rest of the world. I really felt like I was just kind of floating down this river, right? And just letting it take me wherever it was going to go and not really having any control of my life whatsoever. And so, yeah, about, 3 or 4 years ago, I really sat down and thought, who do I want to be as, like I said, a man, a husband, a father, and how do I want to show up to the world and become a little bit more intentional in the way that I do things. So I sat down and really looked at that identity. It even went to the point where I wrote down this whole thing. I have a notebook that is called My Identity, and it speaks on, I've created a mission statement for every piece of my life of, what do I want myself to be as a husband, and here's the, habits I want to create as that husband to become the person that I want to be. And yeah, it's been a long journey. But that's kind of the quick story of all that. So.
There's so much that I really look forward to digging into about that. Like, firstly, as you mentioned before we started, yeah, we've both got that background of being in IT. I lasted about 4.5 years. You've lasted a lot longer than me in the industry. But I think I can completely relate to that sense of like, what's the point? This is so meaningless. Yeah. This is just a grind. I'm doing it for the money. I'm not doing it because it makes me happy anymore. I'm not doing it because it's interesting or exciting. And I feel like that's one of those things that, particularly with like COVID and how the world has sort of, shut down, then gradually reopened, but fundamentally changed. It's given us a lot more time to reflect, a lot more time. Maybe if we're working from home, we don't have that hour each way to commute. Then we're kind of presented with the confrontation of that question of like, well, what is my life actually going to be about? Mm-hmm. And I really relate to that sense of it just being a friggin' drain. I remember the contract that broke me. I worked in like a consulting company that was really small. There was only about 10 or 12 of us. We were basically guns for hire. We'd just go into projects and just help with whatever skill set they needed. Anything from programming to networking to project management to you name it. Anyway, this one gig, I was sitting in a server room that was probably not much bigger than my office, which is about kind of 12 feet square, and 12 by 12 feet sort of thing. And then I had about, I think, 20 or 30 rack mounted servers buzzing at me. There was no natural light. I was on my own in there with all these computer hardware, and I was supposed to be managing like and you'll love this, right? As far as how many steps removed am I from doing something meaningful? I was managing the development platform for a team building a website in a computer programming language I knew nothing about. But not only that, it was actually building a website in Japanese because it was for a new Japanese startup that was spinning off from the company I was in, where they were hoping to sell like retirement savings products, like financial products, to a Japanese market in Japan. I'm like, I can't even read the damn website that we're building as a team here. I have no idea what we're doing. And when I really sat down, I went, well, what's this all about? Like, maybe if I do a good job here at the end of the year, I might contribute to like a fraction of a percent of like uptick in shareholder value. Like that's really the extent of where I could tangibly measure my impact on the world from the work I was doing. And, and when I had that realized, I'm like, man, my days on this planet, like at the time, I probably didn't have the same level of self-love and self-esteem that I carry now. But even then I was like, I'm worth more than this. I need to find something different. Right. And those days when you call in sick, like I wonder, and I'm not sure whether you've come across in your travels online an Australian author and sort of broadcaster called Sarah Wilson. She's written a great book called First We Make the Beast Beautiful. And for everyone listening, if you've ever experienced anxiety or mental health issues, please check out this book. It's incredible. And it takes the premise that she has suffered for a very long time with really crippling, really extreme end anxiety, bipolar, OCD, and a couple of other things. It's like this grab bag full of various conditions. Oh, and she has like a very challenging autoimmune disease to sort of throw into the mix, But she takes the approach that what if instead of looking at our mental health issues as a burden or a negative, what if we look at it as a bit of a superpower? How do we treat it as though it's something like a higher sensitivity to what's really going wrong with the way we're trying to live as humans, And that was what came to me as you were talking about, you'd get halfway to work and think, screw this, I'm turning the car around. Like it's that level of pressure that you were sensing and maybe couldn't articulate at the time. I've had the same experience, and you go, this is not right. I'm not aligned here. I don't quite know what it is, but this just isn't right. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Actually, that makes a ton of sense because, my wife was a teacher for many years, and we actually had about the same kind of conversation. She, and I'm not stepping out here because she's actually been on my podcast and we've talked about this a little bit, but she suffers from depression too. And especially after our first two kids were born, she suffered from postpartum, which kind of progressed as well. But she kind of had the same things. Like every Sunday, she would just get extremely depressed, and she'd be like, "I do not want to go to work tomorrow. It's not my calling anymore." And so, those feelings that are coming up, I definitely agree. I think they're kind of warning signs for, are you supposed to be doing what you're actually leaning towards right now, or is your body trying to tell you this isn't it? It's something else. You need to find what is going to bring you joy. And for me, it's very much, it's why I started the podcast to begin with, is I wanted to be able to help other dads to create better lives. And once I started ingraining that into even my, off hours stuff, it really started to bring me out of that dark place. It was me helping to share the gifts, share the things that I've been learning to help myself, help my family become, create better relationship with my wife, all that stuff that I had been learning and up into the point where I started my podcast. Being able to share all of that with other dads and like I said, hopefully make their lives a little bit better, just created much more passion for me moving forward.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I've had a very similar experience, and there are things that we think, I might start this and I might have a bit of a play with this idea and just see where it goes, right? Like the podcast, interviewing dads and interviewing other people, like I'm just going to try it and see what happens. And it's that curiosity. But then suddenly you realize, or I realized, and it sounds like you did as well, that it brings a lot of joy and satisfaction to your life. And you think, wow, this is really great. I'm really wanting to do this. Like I love setting up the camera and the mic and everything for these interviews because I just like, oh yeah, I get to dig into some really meaningful topics and connect really deeply with somebody here. And it's that beautiful energy exchange, but it fills me up. I feel so energized after these conversations. But then by the same token too, like what is life about other than finding more stuff like that, right? Like really. And if there's stuff in life that leaves us feeling drained, feeling exhausted in an unhealthy way. Like I get that there are days where you put a lot of effort in, your brain's revving pretty high and you feel pretty spent at the end of it. But it's like a good tired, right? Like it's that I've expended today's energy really, really well. I've made good choices. I feel tired and I'm happy about it. Or the same as like doing a day of yard work or whatever it is, building something with your hands. But by the same token, there is the other end of the spectrum where there's that sense of fatigue of this just sucks. Nothing I do is going to make this better. This just sucks, right? So I guess I'm curious from your perspective, because this is about you, not me. What are the things that you first started noticing about that? What was some of the little signposts that maybe I want to start a podcast, maybe I want to start doing something creative or something outside of my current, 9-to-5 cubicle gig?
Yeah. I think I've always been kind of a creative person. I loved art in school and was a graphic design major for a very short time in college. But and much like you, I was a photographer too. So I did that for a little while. But yeah, I think just wanting to create is just filled this little piece of me that was kind of missing. And much like you said, like if I do even doing things with my hands, doing yard work, or I do construction or woodworking or something like that, it gives me energy. I could do an entire day of hauling wood around and being, like I said, exhausted but completely filled spiritually, right? And it's a different feeling than if I'm even just sitting. I live a fair amount away from downtown Chicago. So I'm probably like an hour and a half train ride into the city. And occasionally I would have to go into the city for my work, and I would just be drained on the way home, just from the ride on the train. And even though I was just sitting there for an hour and a half, just
Wow.
totally drained and done. And then I'd get home and the kids would want to play, and I'm just like, I can't, guys. I'm done. I have nothing left in the tank. Yeah. So just having those creative outlets, to help fill that void, was something that became very, very important to me. And I think the podcast came about just because I was a big, listener of podcasts. It's just something I did on my hour commute to fill the time.
Right.
And so I just thought that was a really good medium for me to be creative, find creative ways to find new people, to spread new ideas, just find ways to grow as a person and help others grow as well that might be listening. So,
yeah, that's so cool. And I think one of the key things that I want to really touch on for everyone listening, all the men and women, whoever's listening, what I'm hearing from you there, Jason, is that it just started with that little bit of curiosity about, well, what do I really like?
Yeah.
And becoming aware, gently turning that awareness into, well, how do I feel at the end of this experience? And is this an experience that leaves me feeling great, or it leaves me feeling really wiped out and with that nuance of good tired or just drained energetically, like completely zapped? And then that curiosity, once you start to follow that, that's when it starts to unlock these little moments where you go, oh, that might be fun, right? Like, I can completely relate to, like, woodworking stuff has become something really, really interesting to me. And my dad was a builder for 45 years. He would build houses, right? And then once he'd retired, he started just turning his hand to kind of just woodworky, crafty things. And he used to get a lot of satisfaction out of it. He was really, really good at it. But I'd never really previously done much in that sphere, in that world, right? I was sort of like, I might have made like a pencil box when I was in high school or something, something basic with a couple of hammer and nails and a bit of timber. But now I've just, since the start of since this past year, I've made a couple of pieces of furniture for inside the house, like bookshelves, and I'm going to make myself a desk for the corner behind me, and I'm going to learn how to make surfboards out of timber, where you build a timber skeleton.
Nice.
And then, wrap them in timber, like thin timber planks and all this. And that to me is really exciting and inspiring. And it just started with that little idea of like, well, do I reckon I could make a bookshelf? Because my wife and I were talking about, we need to get some new furniture for the bedroom. We had books kind of all scattered everywhere in this corner. It looked really untidy. And then she'd found some stuff online, and it was literally that case of, man, I reckon I can do that. I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm not an engineer. But I reckon I can put a couple of bits of timber together in a way that looks pleasing to the eye and holds our books up, and it's a bit neater and a lot cheaper and a bit more satisfying than going to the store and spending $1,000 on some high-end bookshelf. So that was where it began for me. But that bit of curiosity and that awareness. So for everyone listening, I think this really starts with just becoming a little bit more aware of, well, how am I feeling right now? And what have I just been doing? And using our skills to reflect and look back at, well, what was I doing an hour ago that might have led me to feel really crappy? Or what was I doing an hour ago that has led to me feeling like I can go and run a marathon, like full of juice, I mean, is reflection in that way? I imagine so, but is it a part of your life? Like, do you have regular routines around taking time to reflect and assess where things are at?
Yeah, I think it's something that I've really put into practice especially over the last couple of years. I have tried to journal from time to time, and it never takes hold for me. But I think for me, I just I really start to notice, especially right after I do something, or I get a lot of feedback from my wife. Quite honestly, we have a really good communication, a relationship where we communicate really well, and she'll call me out if I'm being really, crabby about something or whatever. And then she'll just be like, okay, this is what you need to do, because I've noticed that when you work with some wood for a while, then you start to be a little bit happier of a person. Or if you get outside and go for a run, you're not quite so crabby. And so, getting that little feedback loop, from my wife has been really important to me. But even so, I've, like I said, I've suffered from depression for many years, and it still comes back every once in a while. But I've been able to kind of think about how I'm feeling and what might be causing that now. So I'm much quicker to catch when I'm in those states than I was even 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, it would go, weeks in the past where I was just super down, and now I'm generally like within a couple of days, like, oh, something's definitely up. We need to make sure that we pay attention to what's going on and, what we're doing to make sure that we're getting out of that state on our own.
Right.
Much like you, I've been reluctant to do any sort of medicine or anything like that. Not that, I begrudge that to anybody, because there are definitely people who need that. But for me, I've just noticed I've been able to, like you said, reflect and find ways that have helped me just to be a little bit more aware of myself and bring myself out of those states and into a more joyful place. Sometimes it's not completely into joy, but you go from, even if you go from depressed to kind of a neutral state, it's a positive, right? It's a positive improvement over where you were. So just paying attention to that, paying attention to how I interact with my children, because that was the first thing that I noticed when I started to get, or when I first had my first rounds of depression, is that I was really short with my kids, which is not normally my state. I'm very even keeled and calm, and to a point where my wife actually thinks I'm not emotional enough at certain times. But yeah, so I know I started to notice that I was getting a little short tempered with them, and it just wasn't me. And so I needed to find ways to, catch that early, and so that I can kind of redirect my attention to something that's a little bit more positive.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I hear that too. I think it's as dads, it's one of the things that often, something I certainly see with my clients too, and you can probably relate to this in your own work with dads and the new coaching work you've begun, but often I see men at least, giving more priority to how they show up for their kids and their partner than they do for how they show up for themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes that's the point at which we need to start this conversation, where you go, okay, if you're not quite ready to really focus on doing it for yourself just yet, that's okay. But consider, what are the impacts that you're having on the kids, on these beautiful things you've brought into the world. And as you said earlier, how do you want to show up? What kind of person do you want to be? What are some of the identity characteristics of what that looks like? And I would suggest that, first of all, everybody's just doing their best. Every dad in the world is just doing their best with whatever tools they've got, right? So, and I say that to reinforce that there's zero judgment, right? Some people are going to be better at this parenting gig than others. And honestly, sometimes I'm better or worse than I was yesterday or the day before. And maybe today I'm better than what I'm going to be like tomorrow. Like, it is a variable kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But
yeah, absolutely.
But when there is that direct feedback, you can start to get, I think it's the awareness of when we are in our emotions rather than in a more calm and rational state.
Yeah.
That we start to see that feedback straight away. Like, the kids start to cringe or step away, or heaven forbid, we've made them cry or made them run to their room in fear or whatever, right? Like, these are all things I can relate to firsthand. I've done this to my kids, not that I'm proud of, but that I can speak about it, and then it's in those moments after that, you're like, oh, that feels really bad. I feel that heaviness in my chest that I've just hurt the thing that I love the most, and that's my kids. So that's often a starting point. Was that a big, like, when you first started going on this journey and you spoke to me about, who you wanted to show up to be, did you find it was easier to think of it in terms of the externals, the kids and the wife, rather than yourself to begin with?
Yeah, to begin with, for sure. One of the first things that I really worked on myself to become better, I guess, was my health. I wasn't like super overweight, but I was, definitely 30, 40 pounds overweight kind of thing. And it was a much easier I guess it was much more, it became a better priority for myself to actually want to become healthier for my children. Like, I want to be there when, to walk my daughters down the aisle. I want to be there to, to show them that I have energy to play with them and all those things, but also to model what it looks like to be a healthy individual, or at least someone who's trying to be a healthy individual.
Yeah.
And, I think as parents, we worry about that a lot is, are kids eating enough? Are they eating too much? All those things. And we don't take into account of what they're seeing us do to be a healthy person physically and mentally. And so, yeah, it was much easier to think of it that way, as how can I make myself better for them, for my wife? I want my wife to be, more attracted to me if it or whatever. And yeah. And as I went through that process though, I began, especially, I think we talked about this on my podcast. I got into running, and I noticed that every time I went outside to run, I'd come back and I'd be spent, I'd be exhausted, but I would be, elated because I was outside, I was enjoying the fresh air, I was doing something for myself. And it became very much I need to do this for me, but it also has positive influences for my kids and my wife as well.
There's that beautiful inflection where you start to recognize the benefits for yourself personally, and then you want more of that for you, because you go, oh, I feel so much better after doing this. And I feel so much, like you say, healthier, more energized, more elated. Like, that's such a beautiful, beautiful emotion. Like, it's just, elation. It's so much more than just, I feel happy. It's like you feel the rush, you feel that vitality surge, right? Like, and really that once, I suppose I'm laboring this point because I know that in the conversations I've had with men, we're very reluctant at the outset to think of ourselves as worthy or valuable enough of doing the work just for ourselves. Like the intrinsic motivation is much more difficult to come by at the outset than the extrinsic, where you go, all right, for those people, I will gladly walk over coals. I will go for a run, sweat like crazy, feel uncomfortable, stop eating the chocolates and the sweets, like whatever it is. All the stuff that you've no doubt gone through and I've gone through in our various health journeys, to be, and when you think the long-term modeling, like it's not just about what do you want to get out of this, but how do you want them to grow up? Because it is absolutely true. Monkey see, monkey do, right? Like I literally just had that conversation with my kids about usage of phones. My son's got an old phone that doesn't have a SIM card, and it's an iPod. He just uses it to listen to music, but obviously it's got a browser on there. It's got Apple News. It's got all the other stuff and YouTube. And so he just jumps on the Wi-Fi and starts looking at it. I'm like, well, there's part of this is, there's an addiction or a curiosity there that is just intrinsic to the device. But part of it is what he sees me do. And part of it's what he sees his mum do and his big sister, right? So yeah, absolutely that. And to then turn that around, I've also seen firsthand when I get myself up to do some yoga or, do something fit and healthy activity wise, my son feels more interested in doing that. So he'll get out and, do a little bit of skipping and some exercise and bounce on the trampoline for ages and all that. And, he comes in huffing and puffing and really, oh, that was hard, but really, but feels really great afterwards. And, so there's that lovely emotional leveling that comes from it.
Yeah. It still is a lot of pride, I think, in yourself and your kids too, when they've done something that, they think, oh, look at what dad did and I could do it too. And I think a lot of that you're modeling is, like I said, it's pride. It's wanting to be like you. It's, and if I know so many guys they kind of throw around that pride, if you will, of, well, I work 14 hours a day and I gotta feed the family. And they're not seeing what they are modeling to those kids, and that you really have to, it takes money to be a provider instead of, I don't know, love or affection or time or whatever it might be. And I think that is something that we need to kind of work through. And I don't know if that's, more of an American thing or whatever, but,
no. As far as I can tell, I've spoken to dads from around the world. This is a universal male kind of psyche thing.
Yeah, I think we need to kind of reconsider what we consider or our definition of provider as a man, as a father. There is obviously a monetary and financial component that we have to take care of our kids and feed the family and, be able to take our kids on vacation every once in a while or whatever. But more than that, we need to show our children that, our passions are much more for life versus just going to work every day and just to feed the family. Because I don't want that for my kids. I don't want them to work 14, 16 hours a day just to get more toys, right? I want them to be able to enjoy their life and enjoy whatever it is they decide to do as a career. And then, pass that along to their kids as well and show, I don't know, just show that time is more important than money a lot of cases. I think that modeling is just, it's really important in pretty much everything you do. And that was, that was a big part of my, my identity notebook is like, what are the habits I want to make sure that my kids see me doing so that they can take that on as well.
I love that. There's actually, like that whole piece there for me is just awesome. Like the piece about what are the habits I want my kids to see me do that they will then start to model and start to, almost by osmosis begin to either adopt or recognize as, okay, well, that's how an adult should operate in the world. But also the part about, a definition of, I guess, in a sense, what it is to be a man, what it is to be a father and a husband. And like that notion of the provider, I guess, well, I don't know. I'm not an anthropologist, so I can't really speak with any authority on this, but I imagine that it's actually part of that evolutionary thing of like, the big strong man goes out and clubs the animal to death and brings it home and feeds the crew, And in a way, I know some people who are in like sales training who still use that, whatever I get to hunt and kill, I get to eat, I'm like, okay, great. Interesting. You talk about solving problems for customers as hunting and killing. Good. Find it a little bit unusual personally, but that's okay if that's what gets you over the line. But I feel like there's a nuance to that too, because so much of the way the world operates now is not that kind of linear binary mode, right? There are single dad families, there are single mum families, there are families with two dads that I know, and there are families with two mums that I know. And, as well as the typical mum and dad as a family unit with the kids, mum goes out to work, dad stays home, dad goes out to work, mum stays home. Like, it's really, like, I find it both really exciting, but I also perhaps can appreciate that that's part of what's caused a chunk of confusion in the mix as well. Because we're sort of going, well, shit, what is our role? But then, I don't know, my instant reflex answer to that is, well, my role is whatever I define it as. Right. And whatever works within my immediate family. And I think that might be part of where, you're obviously very accepting of that as well, because, you and I are both guys who have done a fair chunk of that inner excavation on the personal development style thing to, what makes us really tick at a very deep core level with our belief systems and our identities and our values and all of that. But then for the dads that haven't done much of that, even if you were just to ask yourself, what does it mean to you about, being a man in a family? What does it mean to you about being a woman in a family? Like, what's the dad's role? What's the mum's role? And then ask the question, does that need to be true? Is that actually like written in stone somewhere, incontrovertible fact? Not really. These are all social constructs that we've invented and then agreed to. So I don't know. We could rant about this for hours, but I just think that the important piece there is that how we define it. Look, here's basically the bottom line from my perspective anyway. When I try and, think about all these threads that we're weaving at the moment, for a lot of men listening to this, what they've been doing for a long time just isn't working anymore. For you and I, we reached a point where what we had been doing just stopped working. It worked until it didn't. That definition of the man in the family means you go out and you earn the money and you put everything first apart from your own needs and your own well-being, because it's your job to provide and feed the family and put a house over everyone's head, a roof over the head and all that. Like, those things have traditionally been okay as models, but they stopped working for you and I a while ago. and we started looking elsewhere. And I imagine that there's
Yeah.
a lot of guys starting to find that same problem, in which case then we have to think, well, okay, what else can it look like? Tell me, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. And just to step back on the provider piece too, one of the things that I guess have issue with a man being a provider is that you're even in the traditional man goes to work and woman stays home, you're negating everything that the woman does to provide for the family, within the household. But yeah, I think the traditional roles, or even, how we're defining ourselves as man and woman, I don't know if there are any definitions anymore, quite honestly. Like you said, I think it's more of how do you identify yourself as a man? How do you want to show up for your wife, your family, if it's a heterosexual kind of marriage, but also working with your partner to be, okay, these are my roles. What do you want your roles to be? And how can we play off of each other's strengths and weaknesses to make sure that we are successful as a family? So,
yeah. I love that, because it underpins the whole concept of a marriage, where it is meant to be a partnership, right? Like, exactly. Or a relationship of any kind is meant to be a partnership where two people are better together than they are apart. And so in that context, absolutely agree. And I think the thing that we often forget is that we always have choice. We always have choice, right? Like it's sometimes the choices are really shit. Sometimes we're just not prepared to make the choice, right? I get that. But we always, I am free to choose to go out and drive on the wrong side of the road without a seatbelt and all the rest of it. Doesn't mean I'm free from consequences, and doesn't mean that the choice is going to be a good one, but I can make that choice, Yeah. And that's kind of an absurd extreme to that nature of choice, but it always exists. And so then we can get to say, well, yeah, how do we choose to show up? And then using the stuff we spoke about earlier in our chat about, like, what gives us joy, what fills us up and leaves us spiritually satisfied and content, and enriched. That, I think those pieces are sort of the pieces that we could use to say, okay, maybe this is the angle that for us personally, for our family immediately, that we need to start looking in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something that my wife and I have been really working on together over the last couple of years to, find the joy for both of us. She's also, has her own business, entrepreneur. So we both work out of the home. We're together all day. And so we have to figure out, we have to figure out ways to, like I said, just kind of play off of our strengths and weaknesses, and notice when the other one is, a little bit down, and how can we help to pick them back up, or just give them space to grieve, or, be crabby for a few minutes, or whatever it is that they need, and not try to be there to, quote unquote, fix each other. So,
right.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah. Oh man, like every comment you bring up, like, brings up another 4-hour conversation in my head, like about, about the fact that so many couples are now working in the same place that they're living.
Yeah.
My wife and I have been doing that since 2005. So we've kind of had a long history of working together with each other in the same building as we live. But it just recently got brought to our attention, or I say recently, like last 12, 18 months, that we had kind of devolved into this heavily codependent relationship where we were getting all up in each other's stuff and like not staying in our own lane of what are we responsible for ourselves individually, and definitely the conversation about trying to fix the other person and, trying to control or over the top influence the other person because of what we thought was best for them. Like, it just takes away any agency, takes away any empowerment. It becomes a really unhealthy, messy way to live as a married couple. So I reckon there's probably another chat I'm going to have in there somewhere with you and maybe with some other dads about, the nature of healthy work together, work from home, work in the same space as partner kind of conversations. Like it's
what it can be complicated for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think that there's so much good stuff that's come out of this, and I'm really curious to hear from your journey and from your experience, what would be like the one thing that you would say start with, like to any of the mums and dads listening who are maybe having that same sense of like, I feel like there's an identity crisis or a sense that I'm no longer aligned. This is no longer working for me. I'm drained as anything. What would be the first thing you would suggest on the list of things to do or to consider or reflect on?
Yeah, I think for me, and it's work, but you know, like I said, I literally started a My Identity folder and wrote down, you know, everything that I thought I wanted to be and took nothing into consideration of who I already thought I was. Like, I want to be a healthy individual, which you're already 50 pounds overweight. It doesn't matter. It's what do you want to be as a husband, as a father, as a person, and how, you know, how do we, if you're looking at somebody who you have or you think has those ideals that you're looking for, what are the habits that they're doing right now that are getting them there? And then how can I pull that into my life? You know, for me, it was running, it was eating healthier. And that's kind of the first thing I did. I didn't want to try and change everything all at once, just because I knew myself and I knew it was going to be way too much for me. And I'd go a couple weeks and then I'd be right back to where I was and just kind of give up. But yeah, I think the biggest part when people are trying to change, they're making a change is like, well, I've always done this in the past, and you just have to drop it. You have to let it go. You have to take the lessons that were learned from it, from your past experience, and just say, that's not me anymore. This is the person I want to be, and these are the things that I'm going to do to get there. And it can be hard for sure, because you know, you always have these doubts in the back of your mind. Is like, well, you know, I dieted for 2 weeks every year at the beginning of the year. Every year I do the New Year's resolutions, but I always quit in February or whatever. Yeah. And you just have to kind of let that stuff go, give yourself some grace to say, well, it doesn't have to be that way, right? How can I make it easy? How can I make it smaller steps then? If these things were too much for me in the past, how can I make it smaller to make sure that I'm, you know, I get my gym clothes on every morning? If that's the smallest step that you can do right now, awesome, do it. And eventually you'll start building in those other habits to make you, you know, get you to where you want to be. So if it's more date nights with your wife, you know, just, even if it's just blocking off the calendar, you know, once a week or once a month or whatever it is, just to make sure you're sitting down and chatting for 20 minutes, you know, during that given time. A little step will get you a long way eventually.
So true. That's so true. I love that. And I think that I have a really good memory for all of the things that I've started and then not finished, or all of the things that I've started and failed. And, you know, and I think it's taken me quite a while to identify and to eventually sort of, as best I can at this point, heal that inner voice that's just so critical of all of the times I've tried and failed, and all of the stuff that you used to be a really good runner and now you'd be lucky to do 5Ks without blowing out, you know, and you used to do this, or you've tried this every other week, or how many times have you tried a writing practice, and all, you know, all this stuff. Like you said, you know, journaling never quite took hold. Yeah, okay. But and I think sometimes it's because often we think that we're the heroes of the universe and we can just pick up something instantly, make it an embedded habit immediately, and then just, you know, execute perfectly forever from today. But then the thing that I find so beautiful is when we think about this, what we're really doing is we're working with, for our own habits and for our own sense of who we want to show up as, we're working with basically our inner child. Like, we're working with that part of us that is learning something new. Yeah. And when we think back to, as dads, we can see firsthand how many times we have to ask our kids to brush their damn teeth before they go to bed, before it becomes an unconscious habit, right? And still they resist it. There are some nights when I resist it still, where it just, screw that. I just can't be bothered. I'm too tired, right? No, you don't want to like kill your wife in the morning with really, really bad breath. So just go brush your teeth. Or no, I don't want to be at the dentist getting, replacement root canal stuff, all the rest of it. But that's the funny thing about being human, right? Like we have these characteristics. We learn these things, but it takes a while for it to become embedded as a habit. And like the word you used, grace, it's a word I use all the time with my clients and with myself and with my family. Just like we just need to give ourselves grace that we're human. We're learning as we go through this. We haven't got it all figured out right this second. And it takes time, right? Like changing behaviors. It's like steering the Titanic in a lot of respects, because so much of what we do day to day happens on autopilot that we're trying to firstly bring awareness to something. Secondly, reflect on that awareness. Is it working for us or is it not, the way we're currently operating? Thirdly, create something new. And then from that, fourthly, like try and go, okay, now let's create that new habit and embed that behavior. But what I also love, what you said, is that, let everything go. Like literally work from an utterly blank canvas of, I can create anything that I want for my life. What do I want my life to look like? Because so much of our thoughts are shaped by who we have been yesterday or last month or last week. So much of our belief about what's possible is based on what we have either done or failed to do in the past.
Right.
But the truth is, every day is a new opportunity to choose differently and to be a new version of ourselves. So honestly, I think that is just so friggin' choice. But just like, zero out everything else, like erase the ledger. Start from today is all I've got to work with, and the choices I make today are all that matter. Doesn't matter what happened yesterday. Doesn't matter what's happened like 10 years ago. Right now.
Yeah. I mean, you can only live in this moment, right? There's no going back to the past and changing anything. So what is the point of fretting over something that happened 5 years ago or something that you did 5 years ago? Now, if it's something you need to make amends for or something like that, obviously do that. But, making a mistake and then beating yourself up for it just compounds the problem. So just let it go and continue on.
Perfect. I think I'm happy to leave our chat there. Like, I think that's just a really beautiful end piece for us. But I do want to ask, what is it that people can do to connect more with you, Jason, and to learn more about you? Obviously, there's Epic Dad Podcast, which I'll definitely link in the show notes. But where else can people find you and connect up if they want to learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, that's the number one spot. So epicdadpodcast.com is the website, but you can find it on all the Spotify and Apple and everything. Your podcast or your episode will come out in a couple, probably next month. I don't know when this will air, but
we might overlap in the ether somewhere between now and when this goes to air as well.
Awesome. There is as epicdadcoaching.com is in the works. However, that's not live just yet. But that is where we'll have more information on the coaching and myself. But yeah, epicdadpodcast.com right now is the best place to get me, or Instagram is epic.dad.podcast, I believe. So
fantastic. I'm sure the website for the podcast will have all the right links to the socials as well. Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, perfect. Listen, I'm so grateful for your time. I know the joys of time zone shuffling mean that it's getting on into the evening for you over there in the States. So thank you for staying up a little to hang out with me. And
no worries.
Hopefully you get to, kiss your kids goodnight before they go to bed just up now. And I'm really excited to keep staying in touch, Jason, because I think there's so much that you stand for that is really aligned with what I stand for. And that, we need to collect more dads like this to really build this ground shaking kind of movement of like realignment for dads, so that we can thrive, so that we can feel like we're showing up as the guy we want to be, not the guy society tells us we have to be, not the guy that we got modeled by our parents, but the guy we choose. So with that, thank you so much, and we will see everybody again on the next episode of Dad's Guide to Thrive.